Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Wild Yoga Tribe podcast. I'm your host, Lily Allen Duenas. Together, we'll talk about the world of yoga and we'll talk to people from around the world. Join us for authentic conversations about the global yoga ecosystem, and we'll cover yoga philosophies and methodologies along the way. Inhale, exhale. We're about to dive in. Namaste, family, and welcome back to the Wild Yoga Tribe podcast. Today, I am so overjoyed to welcome Amy McDonald onto the show. She's from Castlemaine, from Melbourne, Australia, and she is a spiritual business coach and yoga teacher. She's also the host of a popular yoga podcast called the Abundant Yoga Teachers podcast. Amy's been teaching yoga since 2009 and has taught freelance classes, corporate yoga, and yoga classes in studio. She's even taught yoga classes in a men's prison. She's led workshops and retreats in Australia, Bali, Singapore, Thailand, the UK, Europe, and the USA, and she doesn't just teach yoga. She also teaches yoga teachers how to succeed in their careers. She offers business coaching, social media confidence courses, workshops, and more. She is dedicated to helping yoga teachers grow their businesses to create abundance. So thank you so much, Amy, for joining me on the show.
Are you kidding? Thanks for having me. And that was can you send me that bio? I'm using that one from now on. That was great. Thank you. Very flattering.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had so much fun reading all about you and checking out your website and all your offerings, your link trees. And I crafted that last night before we were getting on today.
Well, be careful you haven't set yourself a dangerous precedent for future guests. Folks, if you're going to be a guest on this podcast, get Lily to write your bio.
Happy to be of service. So thanks, Amy, again for being here. Just to kick it off, would you like to share with us how yoga first came into your life?
Sure. Yoga came into my life when I was 8 by means of my best friend at the time having a bit of an alternative mother. So my best friend was doing yoga, and my mum thought it would be a good idea for me to tag along because I was an anxious and stressed out little kid, and they thought maybe yoga might be helpful. So I started out doing kids yoga. Way back in the 80s.
Wow, that's fantastic. I haven't talked to someone yet who was introduced that early to yoga. Wow.
Yeah, I was lucky. I caught a break, I think. If it wasn't for my friend, it wouldn't have happened.
So did you just kind of, continue on and off throughout the years up until your adult life?
Yeah, it sort of took, one night a week kind of. I was that sort of yoga person. Wednesday nights was yoga night. And then after I finished university, when I was working in Melbourne, I would go to classes on my lunch breaks, a variety of different things, but I wasn't particularly discerning other than happened to like a certain teacher, didn't really know much about the difference between different styles or anything like that. And then I sort of got more discerning with the classes that I decided to take, and ultimately signed up for a 200-hour yoga teacher training in 2009.
Amazing. Was that in Australia or somewhere else?
No, that was in Thailand, in Chiang Mai, and it was a residential one. So it was, I don't know, just over a month living at this very peculiar health retreat. Very peculiar. They had all sorts of modalities and some. I mean, I'm not really a new age person, so there was some wacky stuff that they taught in other classes. People doing all sorts of things like modifying their DNA with special giant egg whisks and all sorts of wacky stuff. And we just lived there on that site for however many, 40 days or whatever, and did really long days of practicing and learning and studying. And it was a little bit like Survivor in that someone had a bit of a breakdown and she got kicked off, and someone had an ethical dilemma with the teacher and he got kicked off. So the group shrunk over time, but I made it through. I almost didn't, but I made it through and got my qualification in the middle of 2009.
Well, you are a survivor, and I am so glad, Amy, that you brought up that example of modifying DNA with egg whisks. Like that's rather unique. Wow.
It was weird. It
Yeah.
was a weird place.
But I did spend a month in Chiang Mai myself doing a 180-hour Thai massage training. So I'm very familiar with
Mhm.
Chiang Mai. It's beautiful there.
Well, we got the weekends. We got Saturday night and Sunday free time, and so I would go into, because it was way out of town. So I would go into town, stay in a hotel for the night, and just feel like a normal person, eat what I wanted, when I wanted, sleep as much as I wanted, not do anything to do with yoga, and then get in the song towel and head back to this wackadoodle retreat center. Bizarre, but good. The training was very good.
Well, I'm glad there was that. And it certainly kicked off your path as a yoga teacher. And what made you kind of want to shift? Or actually, maybe it wasn't a shift, maybe more of a, this additional modality of being a spiritual business coach as well as a yoga teacher. When did that shift happen?
Well, I came back from that training and I opened a small studio, just a home studio, and did that for a while. I was also working as a freelance writer and editor. And then about a year later, I moved to the country, to the little house that I have now, and um, studied to be a life coach. And so I had a couple of different qualifications under my belt. And I started taking yoga and life coaching retreats in Bali. I ran a few of those with a friend and a few by myself. And then I signed up to do a 300-hour yoga teacher training and some more coaching qualifications. And it was in those environments, just meeting up with my friends. That qualification was in Jakarta. We'd go for a week every couple of months and see them. And we were all at a similar point in our yoga careers. And I would just give them informal business advice based on my writing qualification, project management skills, life coaching stuff. And similarly with my coaching colleagues, we would meet up quarterly in different places around the world, and I would just do the same for them, just as friends to friends. And they started to sort of advise me that maybe this is something I should specialize in, that I had a knack for it, and what I was advising them on seemed to be working. I had the all put together. I had a sort of skill set that enabled me to be quite good at that. And so I sort of started developing a business around those lines in about 2014, and then quit my very secure, very grown up, very professional and safe corporate job at the beginning of 2016, and decided to just go all in. And these days, the majority of my work time, if you like, is in the business coaching space, but I also still teach some classes here and there as well, to make sure I don't get too rusty, and I still have, I'm still grounded in practicing what I preach.
Oh yeah, I think that time on the mat is always going to be valuable. No matter if it's in meditation or in pranayama, it doesn't have to be asana, of course, but um, losing that, I think, would definitely be like losing a part of yourself at this point, since you've been doing it since age 8, especially.
Yeah.
Wow. So I love that it kind of happened organically. It sounds like people in your life just kind of, you were intuitively offering just, some of your advice and your expertise and wisdom, tuning in and tapping into all of those credentials and qualifications and skill sets you had. So what is some of the advice then that you would usually give a new yoga teacher on how to kickstart their journey as a yoga teacher? That's one of the questions I get. People pose to me the most frequently, and I've had a couple listeners actually write in about it, saying, "Can we talk more about what to do for new yoga teachers?" Because I think it's such a, there can feel some resistance to entering that space. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Well, as far as the craft of being a yoga teacher, I really believe that there is sort of an apprenticeship phase that doesn't have to last for too long. Sometimes it's maybe only even 6 months, but sometimes it's sort of 2 years, where you just want to teach your heart out, where you just say yes to everything, not unpaid stuff unless you desire to do that, but say yes to all the gigs you can get. Say yes to teaching at gyms and yes to teaching at studios for maybe not a whole bunch of money, to the degree that you can afford to. Teach as much as you can, because you will get exponentially better the more you teach. And then once you get that experience under your belt, you can start to be more discerning. I know when I first started, I taught classes in my what was my lounge room but became my air quotes yoga studio. I taught classes at this women's gym just to the trainers who would clear all the machines out of the way during their lunch break, and I would play these god awful Buddha bar CDs on their request. It was like teaching yoga to the whale music and the panpipes and the wolves howling. It was horrific, but I did that twice a week. I taught yoga at hens brunches where they're all drunk on mimosas, and no wonder you can't do vrikshasana. You can't stand up. Like, I would teach whatever I could get my hands on. I taught a terrible, terrible weekend retreat at a spa sort of destination here near where I live. I had all of these women come on that and made all the food and did all the yoga, and I did everything and nearly killed myself as a result. Horrific. Never do that again. But I think for brand new teachers, just teach as much as you can. Don't worry about sucking. I always say I got cat and cow backwards for a good, I don't know, 18 months. I got them the wrong way around. It doesn't matter. Just you will get your lefts and rights mixed up. So just, it's just yoga. It's just a yoga class. It's just a new skill like any other. Say yes to any opportunities that come up and trust that you'll get better, particularly the more regularly you teach.
Absolutely. It is like flexing a muscle. Like, if you haven't ever done it, I mean, of course, it's not going to be perfect. And I think if you jumped right into teaching to, in a really nice studio, there might be extra pressure and intimidation.
I don't know about that though. I have been to some very nice yoga studios with some very bad quality yoga. I don't think you can necessarily correlate the aesthetic of the studio with the quality of the teaching. I'm just putting that out there.
No, I'm so glad that you brought that up. Preach. That is true. Just because you have beautiful painted walls and all of the statues, it does not mean that the quality is going to be where it could be. But just from the internal landscape, I think that I love that you taught to, the hens club and oh gosh, teaching to whale sounds. What? What was that? That's terrifying to me.
It's probably like 90s spa music, that really bad stuff. Really bad stuff.
So how about Amy? What do you think yoga teachers who are interested in, no matter what phase of their career they're in, what is something you think yoga teachers are kind of doing wrong?
Woof. Okay. Well, I think that one of the things that I see that can be problematic, and I think, I mean, maybe I'm in a bubble because I hang out with the people who listen to my show and the people in my Facebook group. I could be in a bit of a bubble, but I suspect that there is still this lingering inner conflict between the capacity to generate a prosperous livelihood and doing something that you love and teaching yoga. I often have people message me saying, is it really possible to make a full-time living just being a yoga teacher? There's a lot of doubt that it's possible. And it is possible. I've seen so many people do it and not only earn and I don't like the term full-time living because I don't believe that you need to use all of your time in order to generate the prosperity you desire to run your life. But not only have I seen people do that, I've seen people absolutely exceed what they were earning in the job they had previously. So I think it's important to recognize that absolutely you can generate abundance in your life by being a yoga teacher. And if you do it in the right way, and it's not a hugely complicated recipe, this is not making souffles, but if you do it in the right way, it shouldn't be taking all of your time. I'm talking about max 8 classes a week and maybe the occasional workshop, maybe a couple of weekend retreats or even a week-long retreat per annum will get you to 6 figures. It doesn't have to be a hard slog, and you don't have to scratch it out or think that it could only be your side hustle or something that you do for pleasure, but you've got to maintain your other job because that's where the money is. If you want to generate abundance as a yoga teacher, you can do it. You can do it. because I've helped and seen so many other people do it. So I think that's one. It's a mindset piece, that it's not possible to love what you do and have prosperity at the same time, and I think that's a falsehood. So I think that's one. The other thing that I see, the other thing that I think is problematic with yoga teachers, and this probably is in part because the yoga industry is heavily represented with women, at least in the West, and so this plays out as often a self-esteem issue. Who am I to be up in front of all of these people? Who am I to promote myself? Who am I to blow it up on social media or declare that I know something? Who am I to charge more than my teacher? And that limited self thinking gets in the way, blocks people from being able to reach out and serve the people who are looking for what they have. There are people out there who are looking for exactly the type of yoga that only each and every one of us can offer. Like, no one else can offer the same class that I can. No one else can offer the same class that you can. Even if you and I taught exactly the same sequence in the same venue at the same time, it would be a different class. But unless we have the courage to show who we truly are to a wider audience, we can't call in those students who are looking for what we have. So I think, self-worth can be problematic with yoga teachers, and there's no reason why not you, why not me, why not all of us. The world is a very big place. We have now globally accepted that online yoga classes are viable and useful and enjoyable. This is not the same as it was in 2019. We all now have access to a global marketplace to offer our yoga to, should we desire. And there are bound to be enough people in the world that are interested in each of our own unique individual offerings, if we have the courage to let everybody know that we're here.
Preach. I love that. I felt like I wanted to like fist pump the air when you're talking a few times there. That was awesome. I love learning and love talking always about mindset and about how to just say my worth, I'm enough. I'm worth enough. I deserve to be here. That feeling of worthiness and kind of what we deserve or don't deserve, it just can get so muddled with all of these constructs and external and internal dialogues we're digesting. So thank you, Amy, for sharing that.
I think the other piece on it is that, and I know I got this from my dad, who meant very well when he indoctrinated me in this way, but I grew up with parents who taught me that hard work is good work. And so when we decide that we're going to just make our generate prosperity doing something we love, we're in this double bind. Well, how can I love it? It should be hard, right? If it's good work, if I'm going to make good money, then I should be toiling for it. So we get ourselves into this sort of double bind and jammed into almost being kind of resistant to prosperity, because surely I couldn't just enjoy myself into wealth. But of course, there's nothing in the yoga teachings that say that's truth. What the yoga teachings say is, as long as it's dharmic, as long as it's in alignment with your own purpose and with sort of, morality, of course you can generate prosperity. There's nothing spiritual about being broke. Not for householders, right? I mean, we need a caveat around that. If you want to go be a mendicant, if you've chosen to be an ascetic in the forest, then yes, it's spiritual to be broke. You take on a vow of poverty, go rock that. But for us householders, lay people, no. We can have artha, we can have the generation of wealth, as long as it's through the lens of dharma, as long as it's morally correct and righteous in that way. Go, do it. Put yourself out there, call in some new students.
Yes, that's so true. And Amy, I wanted to revisit something you just said too, because when you said, okay, you can make six figures just teaching, 8 class max a week, few weekend retreats here and there, a couple workshops. I feel like some of our listeners, while they maybe were fist pumping with me, their eyebrows might have shot up. Like, wait, but how? So if you're saying just 8 classes a week, few weekends retreats, few workshops, and earning up to six figures or beyond, what I don't want to limit it or maximize that. But do you think that Like, how is that possible besides the mindset element? Is it really just finding these, the clients that can align with your price point and your offerings? Like, what do you think is some of the magic ingredients that go in that recipe?
Sure. So let's be clear. I'm not talking about pounds or euro. I'm talking about dollars. So that's going to adjust up or down. But what I do mean is this is for freelancers. So if you're getting paid, I don't know, 25 euro, 25 pounds or 40 bucks or whatever per hour at a studio, no, you're never going to make it. That is great to do during your apprenticeship. But once you decide, okay, I'm ready to really launch myself, you will have to teach a hell of a lot of classes to make yourself good money if you're going to teach it for an hourly rate at studios. If you go freelance, and you just like this is just about like open your calculator on your phone. I think you'll be surprised how many classes a week. Okay, maybe how much do you charge a class? 18, 20 bucks. Okay, how many people can you fit in the room? 18, 20. Okay, how many weeks of the year do you want to teach? 46 out of 52. All right. It's actually not that much. I think we've hyped this idea of, oh, six figures. I mean, living in a city like Melbourne, six figures doesn't make you, you're not buying a gold toilet with six figures. Maybe you're eating out once a week. Maybe you take an annual holiday, but you can pay your rent and you can get your hair cut when you fancy. And it's not super luxurious living. It's just living in 2021. But I think that if everybody just gets out the phone and runs the numbers, you'd be surprised. It just adds up fast. And if you put into the mix some like a half day workshop every 2 months, 3-hour masterclass or a mini retreat, something of that nature. Maybe that's 60, 65 bucks. Maybe you have 20 people along to those. If it's a huge success, like I did with my friend the other month, we ran 3 of them back to back because they just kept filling up. So, and if you take a retreat somewhere where the overheads are minimized, because remember, with retreats, people are purchasing the experience, not the thread count. We get confused and we think we need to book these luxury venues, which we pay bazillions for, when in fact people are coming for the experience, and a large part of that is the environment and the atmosphere that we create and the classes that we teach. So if you choose your venue, you know, with that in mind, you should walk away with a good profit. So really, just putting those together, maybe some one-to-ones, it's very doable.
Oh, I'm really bummed though that we got to take that golden toilet off the table. That was always on my.
Well, look, I can help you come up with a plan.
Just kidding. That was never on my must purchase list, but
You're more of the like 92 Rolls Royces kind of yoga person. Is that more of
oh,
your
not
goal?
even that. I think just like having good holidays, just I'd love to travel just like you. And I am more accustomed to spending significant amounts of time traveling. So it's just different here in this landscape, but I'm glad that you brought that down to earth for sure, Amy. Just take out your phone,
Yeah,
use your calculator, figure it out, because I
yeah.
think sometimes we can get so intimidated by lofty, how could we ever? But then when you break it down, you're like, oh snap, I'm going to be okay. So yeah, there's a lot of elements into it, of course, the marketing, the, SEO, branding, all these different things, elements, but there's a lot of people out there with great skills who you can tap on the shoulder, hire out. You can do a lot of learning yourself. There's Linda, LinkedIn, YouTube, and is there generally any resources that you really like to point people to, Amy, when they're getting started as freelancers?
Well, honestly, like, here's what I would recommend, because yeah, you need to learn some stuff, but none of it's rocket science. I mean, none of it is more complicated than getting your head around. If you can understand a little bit of Patanjali, you can figure out a Facebook ad. It's not rocket science. There's some basic skills. A lot of people I work with have this fear, I don't know technology, or I don't want to be a slave to my computer. Um, that's all mindset stuff. It's an unnecessary sort of chittavritti. Listen to my podcast. I'm always hungry for topics. So if there's something that you're working on, DM me on Insta. I'll do an episode on it. This is all. Honestly, if I can do it, I don't. I'm not a techie person. Um, we can figure it out. It's not that complicated. I think part of it is just understanding. Okay, what are my targets? So the imagery I like to use here is, if we look at a picture of Lakshmi, she's got the coins pouring out of her hands, but they're clearly going into clearly defined containers. She has a sales target. She knows where the money is going. So when we get clear on, okay, so say, for example, right now for me and my business, yesterday I launched 2 new classes. At this point with COVID, I can fit 10 people in each. So I'm looking for 20 people. That's my target. I've got to find 20 people in the next 2 weeks. Then my classes are full through till December. Great, clear target. Now I can just start playing with and experimenting with all the things I can think of to call those people in. I had a nice walking meeting with a colleague. He's going to tell his team about it. Great. I'm going to put up some things in some local Facebook groups. Great. I've got 100 or so people on a mailing list. Email them. Great. I'll run some Instagram ads. Fabulous. I'll tell my book club. Okay. So none of this is just networking and sharing and doing things that women, like from a feminist learning perspective, this is where we're great. We love telling people what the products that we like, the services that we like. This is just that. And so I don't think it needs to be unnecessarily complicated. If you know what you've got and you know what your targets are, just keep trying stuff until you get what you want. And don't take it personally when something doesn't work out the way you thought it would. If your ad tanks or someone goes around town and pulls down all your posters, that doesn't make you a bad person. It just gives you an opportunity to try something else. We would never tell a beginner who falls out of who topples over in Vera 3, oh, you're rubbish at that. You should just quit now. We'd just say, oh, try again, or here's a modification. And the same is true for marketing. It's just about experimenting, seeing what works, being aware of the results, leaning into what's successful and abandoning what hasn't worked.
I think that is some pure gold that you just shared there, Amy. And I hope that some of my listeners had a little pen and paper down, or hopefully jotting some things and down, because I think that I love how you related it to Lakshmi with the coins flowing out of the hands. And you're like, they're going exactly where she wants them to go. Love that visual. I think that that's something that is going to stick with me. So, Amy, I do want to ask too about Australia and about the yoga scene in Australia. That's such a big focus of my podcast, and I know you're so present with your community, and not just as a teacher, but who teaches, but also helping them to grow, flourish, and be abundant. So, can you tell me about the yoga scene in Australia?
Sure. So we have a thriving yoga scene here, and lots of diversity. I think we're a little behind because we're a little far away. We don't get as much, certainly in the past 2 years, but definitely before then too. Not as much international flavour. So we're a little behind on some things. Something that in it seems to be something that I'm aware of is things like trauma sensitivity. We're a little bit behind on that front here. I'm excited about Australia getting more up to speed. I've seen some practices that haven't been great, particularly out of the major cities. But definitely there's some great schools here, great independent providers. We've got some good festivals, nothing like to the magnitude of, say, in the States, but they're growing. We're starting to see the big yoga product chains, but we've also got some really beautiful independent Australian-made yoga retailers, which I think is really exciting, particularly seeing women in those businesses and creating great sort of social enterprises along those lines. So, yeah, I think we've got a pretty broad range of modalities, all of the major schools represented. Um, but perhaps just a little behind because we're a remote island. We're a big island in the middle of nowhere, so sometimes it takes us a little while to catch up.
Yeah, and Australia, I feel like is so different depending on which coast you're on or which area. Do you feel like the yoga scene kind of varies depending on if you're in a big city or closer to a coast or something like that?
I'm sure that's true for I'm sure that's true for everywhere. Like if you took a yoga class in Byron Bay, it's going to be very different from taking a yoga class where I live. I live near a Satyananda ashram. There's lots of Swami this and Swami that teaching yoga here, which I love because it's the sort of yoga I did when I was 8. But it's going to be very different from the sorts of yoga that you get in Sydney that might be more there's a really strong sort of power yoga kind of factor there, Jiva Mukti people there. So I think cities are generally more diverse, right? I think that's sort of a global truism. Um, But having said that, like I've got clients who live in quite remote, and some of them like really remote parts of Australia, who specialize in teaching yoga to people who live remote, or people who do FIFO, fly in, fly out. They work in super remote places and do 10 days on and 10 days off, out in the mines or the middle of nowhere. So there's that element too, which I really love, supporting people to get yoga to, I guess, unlikely groups. Um, so that's fun. But yeah, I think to answer your question about regionality, I suspect that that's kind of true the world over. That the cities tend to have greater diversity, and the regional areas perhaps less so.
I can see that. Yeah, I do think it's more of a global truism, but I just wasn't sure about coast to coast because I know that I haven't been to Australia before, but I've had friends who've done their year working there. Before you turn 30, you can go spend a year working in Australia, and they've really said there's just such a difference in energy or mindset mentality. Or I'm forgetting exactly, of course, the words that was shared with me, but do you feel like there's a different level of openness or awareness, or a different kind of demographic would be attending?
Well, I guess importantly, I think Australia has the population of California spread over the landmass of, the US. So there's a whole lot of space, uh, and maybe there's a bit of rivalry between Perth and Sydney and Melbourne on the other side of the coast, but it's not the same as, like, I don't know, for example, East Coast, West Coast, US, where we're just different by nature. Perhaps one area that I'm particularly passionate about when it comes to yoga in Australia is just getting more men on the mat. I know I have a colleague, he was a former client of mine, Greg Corley. He lives in Queensland, and he specialises in yoga for blokes. His catchphrase is no Sheilas, no lycra, just like yoga for men. And I think that's a really cool space, like looking at yoga for men as a way to provide social opportunities for guys, that's not going to the pub, that's not competitive, um, that's great for mental health, but in a way that is perhaps less stigmatized than, I don't know, going to a counselor. So kind of, I think that's a really exciting emerging space of, for regional and rural Australia. I'm excited to start doing some of that myself, and I've got some other colleagues who do that. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity for Australia currently.
Oh, I'm glad you shared that. That is awesome. It's a great catchphrase, great tagline, definitely catchy.
Greg, it's Greg's, it's not mine.
No, no, I will. And listeners, of course, I'm going to link to all of Amy's, everything she's mentioned, and how to contact her, and her website and her socials will be linked here wherever you're listening to podcasts, and on my website, wildyogatribe.com. And I'll try to drop a link, if I can remember, to Greg Colley as well, because that sounds like a fun
Mhm.
thing. If you're in Australia tuning in, definitely, and in the Queensland area or visiting, make sure you check that out. That sounds great. And Amy, I would love to ask, I try to ask every guest I have on the show, um, what is your definition of yoga? How do you define it? What does it mean to you, yoga?
Oh gosh, I could answer this in so many different ways. It depends who you ask, right? So it might be the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. Not so much for me. It might be skillful action. I sort of I lean far more towards the Bhagavad Gita than I do to Patanjali. Um, but I think for me personally, what it means is being a good person, trying to do the right thing with my life, trying to be self-reflective, and and I guess, the trickiest part, remembering that I'm actually not just me. This is actually about the collective, and and trying, even in my practice, not to become too self-identified with my physical body. I think that's the trickiest bit of all for me. But I guess, that's part of the joy of the journey, right? You get sizable challenges. You're never going to get bored working on the challenges that yoga presents.
No, and they never really go away, the challenges. Oh, it's amazing to me how I feel like I've worked through something and I then I don't even notice I'm not working on it anymore because I've already started working on so many other things. And then, of course, a year later,
Layers.
I'm like, "Oh, I feel better in that area." Like, "Wow, I'm not so negative in my self-talk or something." And then with that realization, immediately it resurfaces again, and then I struggle for another 6 months. I don't know. I think it is such an amazing, humbling journey, the journey of self-awareness and clear seeing.
And it's all the other cool stuff, right? Like, it's also headstands and hanging out with your yoga friends and nerding out with yoga books and learning more about the epics and meditating and pranayama. It's all of that too. But I don't know. Maybe maybe the approaches become more subtle the more you practice. It seems to be my experience so far, but who knows what's coming next.
Mm, who knows? So, how do you feel when you step on your yoga mat?
Because I haven't been able to travel to see my teacher who's based in the States, I've been doing his online classes. And it struck me the other day because I live alone and we've been in and out of lockdown pretty much for a year and a half, which means I can't have anyone over to my house. I can't hug anybody. It's been a really long time to be isolated. And I got onto my mat and I pressed play on one of his classes. And I just had this huge kind of kriya of this feeling of coming home. It really felt like, oh, I didn't realize I was longing for this familiarity to this degree. It was so incredibly soothing to just feel like my space shrunk way down to just right here and now, and it was fantastic. So sometimes it feels like that. It feels like coming home. And other times it feels like a chore, and I'm thinking about what I have to do next and how can I cheat myself of a few asana to get out of here quicker and go get back to the other thing. So there's sort of the oscillation between those two poles, I suspect.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, oscillation. Again, everything changes. So that's something you can kind of rely on even in your practice. I guess my last question, I would just love to see, Amy, what is something that when your yoga business clients come to you for help with, what do you think is the number one question they ask you? And why do you think that it's so prevalent for yoga teachers?
The thing that people have all sorts of different business models, they have different backgrounds, they have different passions that they want to bring forward. They have all their own, samskara vasana that they come along with that we work on. So, and that's one of the delights for me is that all of my clients are wonderfully different. I wonder if perhaps the overarching question is, do you really think it's possible for me? Which comes back to what we were talking about earlier is self belief, and I think this is where, and I say this often, this is where your business actually is your sadhana, that they're not separate. And the more you understand that, if you can lean into overcoming and understanding in your business, that can be just as transformative, of perhaps even more so, as anything you could do on your cushion or the sticky mat. Because in understanding that, do you really think it's possible for me? Well, it's got nothing to do with each of us on an individual level. And the degree to which we turn the light down or stay quiet or don't show up to things or don't post on social media or don't take that opportunity to be on someone's podcast or don't propose a pitch to the editor or whatever, we're limiting someone else's ability to be able to access yoga. So it's not about, do you think it's possible for me? Any of that small self thinking has to be moved to the side so that yoga can come through. And we can't wait. We can't wait for the transmission of yoga to happen until we've resolved our self doubt. We need to put the self doubt to the side so that the transmission can come and prove to ourselves over time that, yes, actually, it is possible for me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Amy. So, is there anything you'd like to tell our listeners? Any offerings you have, or anything in particular we hadn't mentioned that you would just like to make note of?
Well, come hang out. Like, uh, I should have declared this at the beginning. My ulterior motive, like, really, my evil cunning plan is I want there to be more yoga in the world. I want more people to be going to yoga. There's less road rage from me if someone else's classes are full. So I really, I have this evil pyramid scheme where I want more people to have more classes and more students coming to them. So come hang out with us, listen to the pod, propose topics for me. I'm always doing free stuff. My Facebook group, actually, it's actually a really good Facebook group. I'm not a huge fan of Facebook these days, but it's a group of people who like to troubleshoot and help. If you're looking for what mic do I buy? Should I upgrade to the paid version of such and such? I'm looking for a photographer in God knows where. Like there's lots of great feedback and good community vibe there. So just search for Abundant Yoga Teachers. That's the Facebook group. Same deal. That's the name of the podcast. And hit me up on Insta if there's something that you're working on, you need help with. I love getting DMs. Just come say hey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy, for joining me today. It has been a joy to be with you.
Thanks for having me.
My conversation with Amy McDonald, a yoga teacher from Australia, was relevant, pertinent, and applicable to all yoga teachers who are tuning in. And even if you're not a yoga teacher, I hope that this conversation was still applicable for you and any entrepreneurship idea you're working on or mulling over, or even if you are, thinking about self-doubt or self-esteem. There's just so much juicy bits in this conversation. We talked about mindset, limited self-thinking, and more. We shared a lot of laughter over golden toilets and modifying your DNA with kitchen utensils. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Yoga in Australia episode of the Wild Yoga Tribe podcast with Amy McDonald. Be well. Thank you for being on this journey with me. It has been a privilege to be with you. I know that your time is precious, and I am both humbled and honored that you chose to spend your time with me here on the Wild Yoga Tribe podcast. As you are on your own inner journey, remember that you are not alone. There are so many of us on this path to awakening, this path of self-discovery and expansion, and we are right here alongside you. Remember to hit subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And if you feel called, please share this episode with someone that you think could benefit from it. Leaving a review would also be so appreciated. If you're on social media, I am there too at the Wild Yoga Tribe. You can tap into all the amazing resources on my website, thewildyogatribe.com, and you can meditate with me on Insight Timer and get your flow on with me on my YouTube channel, where I've recorded free yoga classes. If you would like to schedule a private yoga or meditation class with me or a coaching session, you can find the link to do so to book in the show notes or on my website. Again, thewildyogatribe.com. Thank you once again, dear listener, for being with me. May your day be light and bright. May you be peaceful and happy and led on the right path, free of suffering and free of sorrow. Be well, dear one. Be well.